For the higher.
To order the May 2025 meeting of the Special Committee on University Workforce of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone joining us here in the West Committee Room. While today's meeting is not being live streamed, the recording will be uploaded and archived to the board's YouTube channel after today's meeting. A quick note for special committee members and presenters, you'll notice that the West Committee Room has new microphones in front of you that are live and replace the room-wide microphones. That's these flat things right here. These are microphones. This is to improve audio for both in-room audience and those watching at home. Let's turn to the first item on today's agenda, which is to hear an overview of the university's approach for evaluating and rewarding employee performance. Joining us is Brandon Sullivan, Senior Director of Talent Strategy. First, Vice President Horstman, would you like to provide a few opening comments?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Johnson, members of the committee. Strong and consistent performance evaluation practices are critical for driving employee engagement, productivity, performance, and the retention of employees. Today, we are joined by Brandon Sullivan, as Vice Chair Johnson stated. Senior Director Sullivan is the Office of Human Resources Talent Strategy Leader, covering areas of performance management, leadership development, supervisor training, and engagement. And he's here to talk to us about the university's approach to evaluating and rewarding employee performance. Senior Director Sullivan, if you would start. And I notice our next presenter, Senior Director Roman Kuhl, has joined. I think you're in the bullpen for questions, maybe. Okay. Sounds good.
I want to welcome both of you to the committee, and please proceed as you feel most comfortable.
Thank you. Projecting. Okay, there we go. And the mic, I just talk now. The microphone's picking it
Go right ahead.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't get partway through. So thank you. So the committee. I apologize, it's not advanced. Oh, I don't know, I pushed it again and it worked. So the committee had asked for an overview of the university's current model for evaluating and rewarding employee performance, including the process, how the merit pool functions, and how the current model is effective in retaining talented employees. And so I'll address each of these as we go through the presentation here today. And my colleague, Senior Director Mary Roman Kuhl, will also address some of those elements in her presentation as well. So I want to start by grounding us in the board policy around employee performance evaluation and development. This really guides the work that we do, and it's rooted in best practice and what we know works in terms of performance management and supporting the development of employees. And I want to call out a couple pieces to this that are particularly relevant for how we go about this. One is you'll notice that supervisors are really centered in this policy. And that is a good thing, it's appropriate, and it's really the only way to do this well, because supervisors are the ones who have the most direct line of sight to the holistic performance of the people who report to them. And also, the majority of what's effective in supporting performance and development has to do with those conversations that happen between employees and their supervisors throughout the year. And the second thing that I want to highlight here is that performance evaluation is just one part of a much bigger picture. So the policy also addresses, which is really a good thing and helpful, that this also exists within the context of support of supervisors supporting the development of employees and providing guidance, which you could also refer to as sort of development coaching and other things that I'll speak to. So to understand the model that the university uses for evaluating and rewarding performance, the first thing I want to share is kind of the roles and responsibilities. So who does what at the university. So we'll start with our central units, our centers of expertise. So this would include, for example, the Office of Human Resources, Faculty and Academic Affairs, and there are other central units that play a role in various aspects of performance management as well as rewarding, recognizing performance. The role of those central units or those centers of expertise is to provide expert guidance. You could kind of think of it as providing guardrails around kind of what are effective practices and what's outside of the guardrails, things that we won't do, that we can't do, that don't work, that create risk, et cetera. As well as providing a range of tools to support this work. So just to give you a few examples, the Office of Human Resources has a tool called the Performance Appraisal Tool, or PAT, as it's affectionately called, that supports staff performance evaluation. There's also a tool coming out of the Provost's office called Works that supports faculty recording their accomplishments that also is part of that world. There's a lot of tools that are available, but those are some examples of some of the tools that are provided. And then thirdly is training and resources. So the central units provide a whole range of training, tools, guides, instructional videos, et cetera, that support supervisors and employees in implementing that guidance and using the tools that exist. And I'll just note too, since we're talking about performance evaluation, just this year, OHR launched a revised version, an enhanced version of the performance appraisal tool to update it and enhance it and help it to meet more of the needs that exist and support a broader view of performance management I'll talk about in a moment. So then at the college, campus, and unit level, each has a leadership team, right? And so you have HR leads, you have IT leads, you have finance leaders, you have associate deans for faculty affairs or vice chancellors, the vice deans. There's a variety of terms that are used for those roles, but each college, campus, and unit has a leadership team, and their primary responsibility is to take the guidance, the tools, the training, and resources and translate that into practices that are going to work at their level, at their local level, that are going to support the priorities, the needs, the unique challenges that they face within their college, campus, and unit. And then lastly are our supervisors. And we have about 6,000 people across the university system who have responsibility for one or more direct reports, and so have primary responsibility for implementing those practices within their college, campus, and unit. So those are roles and responsibilities and how that model works. I want to talk now about what those kind of guardrails or best practices are around performance evaluation, and then I'll talk about the rewarding performance component next as well, so you can get a sense for the guidance that's provided and some of the tools. So for performance management and performance evaluation, all of the tools, training, practices, et cetera, that we use are rooted in evidence-based practice for what supports employee development, performance, retention, engagement, and other things. And so you can see here on this graphic here, it starts with setting good goals, which means being clear around expectations for performance, expectations for how work is done, and other things at the beginning of the performance cycle, right? Is being just clear with your direct reports, if you're a supervisor, on what success looks like. And that actually, I'll just say that the research shows that's one of the most important parts of supporting strong performance, but often in practice, it's not given a whole lot of attention because the focus tends to be on the end of the year performance review. But if you want to have a good performance review at the end of the year, often it starts with setting good goals. So that's something we try to really emphasize in the training that we provide and the consultation that we do. And then the bulk of actual sort of meaningful performance management happens throughout the year in ongoing conversations between supervisors and their direct reports. So it's conversations about progress toward goals, challenges they're running into, problem solving, how are we going to address an issue you're running into. Oftentimes work, goals, priorities shift and change throughout the year, sometimes day to day, week to week, right, these days. And so it's those conversations that help employees to understand how to adjust to changing priorities, to changing goals, to changing needs, to deal with unexpected obstacles that they're facing. And so it's really kind of those conversations throughout the year that play the biggest role in supporting employee performance and development. And then, of course, at the end of the year, there's a formal review. And if the other pieces have happened, if there's been good and clear goals, and then ongoing conversations throughout the year around progress and problem solving, then a formal review won't have any surprises for anybody in it, and it'll be simply a summary of the conversations that you've been having throughout the year. Now, that tends to get the most focus for people is the formal review, but as you can see, it really doesn't have to be that big of a deal if you're doing these other pieces throughout the year. And so that's a part of what we're really emphasizing in the training and work that we do. I will mention a few things that we're doing to support this. So I mentioned the performance appraisal tool, but we also have a supervisor development program. So as I mentioned, we have 6,000 people across the system who have people reporting to them. We have a supervisor development program that offers, for example, new supervisor orientation. So every new supervisor can opt to take that course, which introduces them to some of these concepts and some of these tools. We also have a range of training courses, facilitated courses, on-demand courses. You can just access resources on the website for supervisors that go into detail on all of these things, that provide templates and guides and training videos and other things. So there's a lot of resources to support this with our supervisors. I also will mention we just completed another round of what we call our performance management certification program, which is a course that we offer for HR professionals to help them to implement these practices successfully within their college campus and unit. We also the university requires every employee to have an annual review and to have that fact recorded in PeopleSoft. So there is that component as well. So then talking about rewarding performance, so all of the tools, the guidance, the resources and training that we provide centrally to support this are based on these concepts here. If you look in the left-hand column, you can see some of the rewards that the university offers. So these are things that our employees benefit from that means a lot to many of our employees, I would say all of our employees. A compelling mission, we talk about that a lot. That really, as someone who's done a lot of work with engagement and development and recruiting and hiring and these kinds of things, it is very true that we have a workforce where people are very identified with some aspect of the mission. And it means different things to different people, but that's something that really does attract people here and keep people here and motivates people considerably here is the connection to whether it's research or teaching or whatever aspect of the mission is most relevant for them. So that's a real value that people get from working here. We also have a variety of different programs that support things like work-life balance, well-being. We have tuition benefits. There's other things that we have employee assistance program, other things that people benefit from that are actually keep people here a lot of times is access to those sorts of resources. And then our traditional benefits, right? Health, dental, et cetera. So these are things that locally don't have a lot of control over, but are really important in rewarding people who are contributing and performing well here. So then as we get to the local piece of this is more of kind of what we think about maybe in terms of retaining talented employees. There are a variety of things that pay gets a lot of attention, and there's a lot of discussion around that, and it is obviously important. However, when we're looking at rewarding performance, different employees value very different things. And so you can see some of the things there that we know are very motivating for a lot of employees. I'll just give some examples. So many employees who are very high performing, they're ambitious, they want to advance their careers. They're very motivated by having opportunities for promotions, opportunities to take on work of greater responsibility or authority. Pay may be a factor for them, but that may be more important. The reason they may be staying or leaving is whether they see or don't see those opportunities for advancement. Flexibility is another good example. There are a lot of people who would trade pay for more flexibility in their work around when they work, where they work, et cetera. Others wouldn't, but some would. And so flexibility and flexible work arrangements can be something too that is very motivating for people and is an important way of rewarding performance. Having opportunities for training, for support, for coaching. We have a lot of employees who tell us through the engagement survey, for example, that they really value getting support for their development and coaching from their supervisor and mentoring and these kinds of things. And that's an important factor for many of them in whether they stay or not, and how motivated they feel when they're here. You'll see pay, of course, is on there. One of the things in terms of rewarding performance, and this connects to the role of our supervisors, is that everybody has their own things that motivate them. And people differ in what those are. And one of the things that can go wrong is when you're making assumptions about what's motivating a particular person, or saying, okay, well, I'm motivated by this, so other people must be. It's easy to do that. We all do that sometimes. But one of the things that's really effective is when you think about what are all of the things that could be motivating to people and rewarding performance, and what does this person value? What are their goals? What are their interests? And as a supervisor, it's very important to have an understanding of what that is, so that you can then do what you can. And we can't control all of these aspects of rewards, but most supervisors have some degree of control over some of these, that you're rewarding people in ways that are going to be meaningful to them. So now there was some question around merit pay. So I'll touch on that. And my colleague, of course, can go into more detail on this in her presentation. But in terms of merit pay, so this is also called pay for performance. A lot of organizations refer to it that way. And I'll just mention that a majority of organizations in the United States do have some form of pay for performance. In the private sector, it's very, very common. And it's even very common in the public sector for at least segments of the workforce. We refer to it as merit pay, but if you're familiar with pay for performance, it's just another term for the same thing. And so here at the university, you can see there are some employees who are included in merit pay, some who are not. So those who are included in merit pay, you can see in the column on the left. Those who are not included in merit pay are those who are represented by collective bargaining agreements, as well as a few other groups. Graduate assistants, of course, are covered by collective bargaining agreements. I'm calling that out here just because that's new. So wanted to make sure that there was awareness of that. So what's the model for merit pay and determining merit pay? You can kind of think of it as, part of it is looking at external market data in terms of trends in the market for where do we compete for talent, right? Where do we recruit from? Where do we lose people to? That's where we really want to understand what is happening with pay in the external market so that we can be competitive. So that's one piece, but then the other piece, of course, is the budget realities, right? Is how much money is available to provide a merit pool. And of course, that can be, challenging, and that can make it difficult sometimes to keep up with inflation and other kinds of things. So there's sort of those two big pieces. One is who are we competing with for talent and what's happening to pay in that space? And then what are our budget realities looking like, and what can we afford to pay for merit? And that's how all organizations that do pay for performance have to deal with those same two things. Also, merit pay, so when we're determining what someone should receive for a merit increase, there are a couple different factors that we would look at. One is performance. That's should be kind of clear, right? Is how well are they performing, but also where do they fall in their salary range is another factor. So you might have two employees who are both high performers, so they're both performing at the same level, very high level. One is low in their range, one is high in their range. So you might you would probably want to take that into account and potentially give a little bit more to the person lower in their range, for example. Now, each situation can be unique and different and so on, but just as kind of a general principle, those are some of the things that we want to look at. And I'll also, I mentioned before those roles and responsibilities for the central units and local. Each college campus and unit has the autonomy to make decisions around how they want to implement merit, given their workforce and their budget realities and so on, within those guardrails provided by Central. So performance-based pay is often, merit or pay for performance increases are what the focus is, but there are other opportunities that are really important for us to all be thinking about in terms of how do we get pay aligned with performance. And so you can see on this slide, there are a number of other points in an employee life cycle when we would want to think about pay and performance together. So of course, the initial offer when someone is hired is a really important that's kind of an anchor point a lot of times for where someone starts out, and making sure that that's aligned with, what they're likely to be able to contribute to the organization. Promotional increases, so being really thoughtful and strategic about how we reward people pay-wise in terms of if they take on a new role, larger role. And then, of course, there's the annual merit increase. And then periodic market adjustment. So this, there are certainly times, and my colleague can speak to this in more detail than I could, but there are times when certain types of roles, the job market is really hot, right? And so the pay is going up and up and up, and it might be going up so quickly that you want to give some pay increases to people at the university who do that kind of work so that we don't lose them and so that we're keeping up with the market, just for example. The other thing I want to mention is, retention offers are something that happen, right? We can't avoid those, and they're not always bad, but they do tend to be more reactive, right? So someone who we want to keep gets an offer from outside the university, and suddenly we find ourselves in a position of having to quickly figure out how are we going to counter that offer? How much are we going to try to offer to retain them? Where's that money coming from? We're never going to not have that, but one of the things to think about is that if we're doing these other things well and consistently, we should have fewer examples where we have to scramble to make a retention offer. So that's something that I think can be a benefit of putting, making sure we're consistently following these practices as we're making these decisions. I will mention a little bit about salary ranges, and you may or may not kind of be familiar with this, but just since this is something that is relevant for what we're speaking to today. So we have salary ranges for all these different jobs, and there's 3 kind of points to keep in mind. There's the minimum, the midpoint, the maximum, and this is based on the external market data. And so this is adjusted as the market changes. But the midpoint tends to be kind of where we would want typically to have someone who is mastery in their job. So essentially, this is someone who is performing all aspects of their job well. Now, budget realities are the other piece to this, right? So you're not always going to have someone be able to pay someone at the 50th percentile, but in terms of sort of the ideal connection between where someone is in their pay range and their performance, that's kind of what you would hope to be able to do. And then there's a minimum and a maximum, and it's generally about a 65% spread between those two that define the lowest and highest that we would be willing to pay. And so you can kind of see those mapped onto performance. And this is not a direct formula. This is more conceptual to sort of say, how would we want to line this up? So when you have someone who's a learner, right, they're not at this point adequately performing all aspects of their job, which is expected sometimes when someone is new in their role or someone has just been promoted, they're still learning. There's nothing wrong with that. It's expected, but then you would expect them to be lower in their pay range if someone is really exceeding expectations and they're not only meeting the needs of the role, but going beyond that, that's where you would want to see someone higher in their pay range. So that's kind of how you would look at those connections. And you can see there the roles that have pay ranges. Then another question that came up was around sort of what do we know about the effectiveness of the models that we have for this in terms of turnover and engagement. And this is where, there's kind of 2 levels to this story. One is the university-wide level, and that's what I'll mostly speak to. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a whole range of different stories at the local level, exceptions to some of this. But when we look at the university as a whole, one of the things that we can see is our voluntary turnover rate is at or below kind of the industry standard. Typically, you would think, a healthy turnover rate, and this can vary by role and type of organization, but in general, is between about 5 and 10%. If you have lower turnover than that, that actually could create some big challenges. If you have higher turnover than that, that obviously can also create challenges. Our turnover rate is based on, and my colleague Vice President Horstman had presented to the board, I think it was 2023, some data on turnover. And at that point, we had between 4 and 12% turnover, voluntary turnover by employee segment. And so you can see we're kind of we're really well in that range for the most part. There's data from higher ed that the average turnover, voluntary turnover in higher ed as an industry was 14% in 2022-23. So again, this is looking at a broad level. But when we look at that, if you ask the question, what does our overall turnover rate look like at the university? Is it healthy? Is it not? Do we have a problem? It's healthy at a university level. That doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't places at the university, departments, types of roles where the story is very different. And so that's part of, I think, the work ahead is to really dig into and better understand where we have turnover rates that are more problematic and sort of how to identify them and then what we can do to address those. In terms of engagement, we've consistently been doing an engagement survey for 10 years, and it allows us to look at how we're doing against ourselves, but also compared to external benchmarks. And we consistently have highly committed and dedicated employees. As some of you know who have heard me talk about this before, we do tend to have a lot of frustrated employees, which means very engaged and motivated, but there are some aspects of the work environment that are maybe getting in the way a little bit, inefficiencies or, the perception of not being able to move forward with what they want to do because they've got to follow a bunch of different processes. It's very typical in higher ed, as you all probably know, but that's one of the things that we do see. But in terms of commitment, overall engagement, very high. Intent to stay, I'll just give you one data point to kind of illustrate this. So there was a survey of higher ed for staff, and 29%, or this is development opportunities, 29% said they have opportunities for advancement. 72% at the university said they have opportunities for advancement. In terms of turnover, 35% in higher ed said they're very likely to look for a job within the next year, 7% at the university. So again, our overall metrics look pretty good, which doesn't mean there aren't opportunities, but I think the opportunities are going to be more identifying at more of a local level. Where do we have departments? Where do we have roles? Where do we have particular challenges to better address?
Senior Director Sullivan, we only have probably a few minutes left for the presentation. So if you want to, at a high level, hit the key points, and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation and questions.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Sorry. So there are a number of related efforts that we have to support this. I won't go into detail on this. We've talked about a few of these here in the past, different tools and systems and trainings and so on to support, talent development and talent mobility. Some of the challenges which are, come up already a little bit is around just different units have different resources, different budget challenges. And so it is difficult to have like one particular approach that works for everybody. That's why we kind of have to have those central guardrails and then local application. And there are some examples that I was giving. I'll skip this for now, but happy to go into this if people want to talk a little bit about what are some examples of how we would connect performance and merit pay. Okay, so I'll end there. And if there are any.
Regent Turner.
All right, thank you, Chair Johnson. So I have three short questions. First of all, you said you had 6,000 supervisors. How many employees do you have total in the university? I just want to know what the ratio of supervisors to regular folk.
I believe it's about 27,000 total employees.
In the whole university system? Okay. And then in regards to merit pay, because I think I've alluded to the fact that this is a totally foreign concept to me. Question one, is there a baseline amount that everyone receives every year?
So the merit.
Does anyone walk away with not getting anything?
Yes, because the way the merit pool would work is that, let's say that it's a 3% pool. Then each unit would go through and say, okay, for our employees that are part of the merit pool, how are we connecting performance to merit? And there are definitely examples where a unit would say, okay, if you're at lowest level of performance, you do not get a merit increase. Others will take a different approach, but it does happen. I'm not sure if my colleague could speak to the frequency of that, but it does happen.
Is Chair Robin Gully present? Chair gully regions of, yeah. So we have, we do run reports and we look in backwards in time to see if people are using the merit pool effectively. So if you just see everyone's giving, let's say we have a 3% pool and everyone's awarding 3%, well, that's not exactly the intent of the program. So we look just to see patterns and kind of in a rearview mirror perspective. And you do see a lot of people tending more towards that middle number, the 3%, and like the tails more on like a 2, maybe a 1. We do have situations where if there's a documented performance issue, like it's very well documented, it could be a 0. It's not common, but it, it could be. So mostly you're gonna see most people centered in that center number and then tails on the sides.
Right, because I would expect, and that tails on it, I would expect there would be some kind of documentation as to why, in their chart, as to why they got the 0 raise, right? And then
100%.
another question in regards, do you have a specific grading system to keep process as objective as possible for these supervisors? Because otherwise it could be very, in my mind, it could be very subjective.
So
Popularity contest, the whole 9 yards. These are the things that come to mind. So, well, how do you train? Do you have really good training for these supervisors? And do you have an objective, as objective as possible, guidelines?
So yes, I would say there's two parts to that. One is, yes, so we have a performance appraisal tool that is available for all staff performance evaluation, and it has specific categories of performance. It defines what those look like, and it connects to resources to help supervisors evaluate those. The second part to my answer, though, is that is not required for everybody to do that, right? Units can choose to not use the performance appraisal tool. And so there are some units that will use other tools and other processes. I would say over the last few years, most have moved to the tool, but it is something that units can choose to take a different approach to. So for those that we work with, for those that are in the tool and those that do take the training, they do get that. That is critically important, what you said. Our ability to sort of mandate and require that, however, is, it's a local decision a lot of times how to implement that.
Can I have one more follow-up then on that?
Yes, and then the other region questions.
Right. But if you have this and they don't choose to use it, is that ultimately a part, because I would assume supervisors get evaluated too. So their use of it or not, or how they do their merit raises, is that looked at in their overall evaluation, but of the supervisors?
It should be, and it is typically. I would say because of local autonomy and how all of this is done, you're going to see some variation across the system, but that is something that we believe should be the case, and it is something that we're seeing a lot more of.
Okay. Thank you. We've got Region Davenport, then Region Hipsch, and then Region Davenport.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sullivan. You always have really good presentations and answer the questions I think that we've posed for you. And going back to the slide on best practices, I think you do model best practices. We do model that here at the University of Minnesota. Of course, it's not always 100%, but you have opportunities, as you said, to get there. You answered most of my questions on merit pay, which I believe in. Would you answered that mostly in a sense that you try to train to avoid across the board 3%, for example, and that you really want, the goal is to have true performance pay. And then you use the 3% example. Is merit pay, performance pay always percent, or is it maybe a cash? Or is there an option for an employee?
I can take that. Region Davenport, we have, usually it's a percentage. So our colleges and our units all have kind of discretion in how they want to have that formula be built. We do look at the formulas, so we have a eye on what's happening and making sure that all the different models of how the pay is distributed are reasonable and they would stand up to good best practice standards. And then some of them will say, we're gonna give the percentages like 1, 0, 1, 3, 4, so forth. And sometimes they will say, we're gonna do something where we have maybe like a $500 discretionary amount, and we're gonna apply that to like the very top star performers. We're gonna give out 15 of those. And that's, again, a very common industry standard. We give guiding documents when the merit process starts, and we'll say like, here are 5 different models of how you could do this. And there's a million variations in between. And so, yeah, we have some groups that will say, we're gonna have a little pot of money where we're gonna give that as a flat dollar amount for a little extra acknowledgement for people that have had just a really fantastic year. It's probably less common, but we have groups that choose to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then, um, back to the supervisory role, I think it's really critical to the employee that there are no surprises when they get their performance review. If they've set their goal, they've met with their supervisor, they've had positive reviews, and all of a sudden they get a review that is not, there's a big disconnect. And so, what percent, would you say we're 100% there, that everyone has an annual performance review? We're 75% there? I know it's very difficult, especially if there's a start end time, but are we pretty much compliant in 100% performance review annually?
I would say, I don't have data in front of me, but it is, I'm sort of guesstimating it's probably in the 80 to 90%, which is we've improved in this area quite a bit over the last 10 years. It's been a real focus at the university, is the role of supervisors, providing more training for supervisors, setting more expectations around supervisors doing this work, and those kinds of things. So I would say that I would say we're compliant with sort of having the annual review done, with a few probably very small exceptions, but important to address. I think to your point about sort of not being a surprise, that's probably more the work in progress. Is there are some places where definitely managers are, having those ongoing conversations. They're making sure that nothing is a big shock in a review, which it shouldn't be. But it does still happen sometimes. And there's various reasons and challenges that supervisors have, I think, in that. But I would say we're making a lot of progress, and we do see through like the engagement survey and other surveys of employees, our employees are experiencing more feedback, more development coaching and things from their supervisors like now than they used to. And so we're kind of headed in the right direction, I think.
Then lastly, I just want to acknowledge, and for our next report too, and others during our meeting, that all these issues and elements are really challenging during a time when we're looking at budget constraints. And it's just, I think, important that we continue with the best practices, that we have the goal setting, we have the continual feedback, and that as we hit these challenges, we're not like the federal government where people don't know why they got whatever. So communication and challenges.
Thank you. Running short on time, but Regent Hipsch and then Regent Go.
I'll shorten mine up. I was very happy to see that 7% versus 32% number at the bottom. That was good. And then I was just gonna say on the 3%, let's say you have a cost of living increase of 3%. Then everybody gets that, right? And so then the bonus pool could go away. Is that how I understand?
Regent Hipsch. So the 3% is built based on surveys that we get, and it shows what other institutions have planned.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, most times, that, say 3% or whatever we pick, exceeds the cost of living. The last few years, that's definitely not been the case when we've seen inflationary rates of like 8% and so
yeah.
forth. But usually it exceeds inflationary cost of living increases. So people don't just get the 3% and then move into like a merit-based model.
Okay,
It's kind of baked in.
okay.
So if cost of living is like 2.5, we're awarding a 3%. Yes,
So you don't stack them, the two
do
and a half?
not stack them.
Okay, that's my question. Okay, so thank you.
And it's most typical that other leading institutions don't either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Regent Gully and then President, do you have?
No,
Regent Gully, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, presenters. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask a question that I think I fairly well know the answer to, but I just think it's important to mention it on the record. So I think I might sound like a broken record to you all, though, so I apologize in advance for that. But I do think it's important to talk about. So adjuncts, I assume, are not included in that merit pool, and I believe that they're 40% of our teaching staff. And so I'll just ask the question, and then feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about anything. But are they included in any kind of cost of living raise or anything like that, or is there any way for people in the adjunct pool to have any cost of living or merit raises, or or is there anything that you do to follow that and to track it and see if they're getting any cost of living increases? And also, if anyone doesn't get an increase over multiple years, is there any kind of appeals process? Thank you. I realize that was a lot of questions wrapped up together.
Chair Gully, Vice Chair Johnson, this is Ken Horstman, and I'll turn it to Mary if she has any additional comments. When we look at term faculty and adjuncts, they are not included in the merit pool currently. There has been a lot of work in our shared governance setting on a subcommittee under the Senate Committee on Faculty Affairs, as well as in another committee of the Senate to bring forward recommendations on how to look at pay for these roles. The Office of Human Resources has now been engaged, and we've done some initial modeling. It's not ready to be recommended or implemented, but there is work going on to address the current state, to look at the minimum pay level, and then how we carry this forward. So that is an awareness we have, and there is some action being taken on it. Of course, the constraints of the budget, as with everything, will play into how we set those priorities. Senior Director Romancool, do you have anything to add?
That's perfect.
Okay.
President Cunningham.
Yeah, Chair Johnson and Chair Gully, and I want to get to a little question that we've heard around here before about those ratios when you're asked about the number of employees, because universities are not regular industries, right? So, one can't compare the supervisors and the number of people to, target. We have, research projects for which there are 4 people on them, and there is somebody who is supervising them, who is the PI, who needs PI supervisory experience and counts as a supervisor of that research staff. That research staff can't be 20 people because the project is only funded for it to be 3 people. But that supervisor still better have supervisory experience and is labeled as a supervisor of those people of that research staff, for example, for which they have hired and they have oversight of, and they need that training, and we need to hold them to be accountable as a supervisor. But that's a different ratio than, let's say, of the custodial staff or certainly of healthcare staff. And this does not include our healthcare workforce, obviously, because that's related to Fairview, right? So I just want to kind of get out there any misconceptions that we have too many supervisors per staff when many of our research projects and stuff, which account for $800 million a year of our expenditures, are in groups of 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 people. So
Okay, I
that might
appreciate
help with that kind of industry standard. thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you, President Cunningham, and we'll have to move on now, but we've got, our next item is actually, Senior Director of Total Rewards, Mary Roman Kuhl, who's already up there. And this will be a discussion on compensation structures and strategies. And Vice President Horstman, would you like to start us off?
Well, I will just make this brief. We've been talking about performance management and compensation and merit pay. We know competitive compensation is a critical in shaping a successful workforce, retaining skilled professionals and staff, and it greatly influences our ability or inability to attract and retain key talent. So I'm going to turn it over to Senior Director Roman Cole to take us through how we approach that and some of our work that we have been engaged in recently.
Chair Gully, Vice Chair Johnson, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to meet with you today. The objective of this presentation is to provide education on the university's implementation of market-responsive compensation structures for both faculty and staff, and how this work has led to a clear assessment of how university pays compares to the market, manager education, advocacy for funding, and meaningful improvements to pay for our employees. Compensation is one of the foundational elements that attracts talent to the University of Minnesota, along with competitive benefits, professional development, and advancement opportunities. We also support employees' well-being through offerings such as hybrid work, and we're known for a strong sense of community. But perhaps one of the university's greatest differentiators is offering work that connects us to the university's incredible mission and provides a strong sense of purpose for our employees. While we view compensation as just a part of this broader set of offerings, we know that competitive pay matters to employees. The College of University Professional Associations HR's 2023 Higher Ed Survey found that pay was the top reason listed by employees who were seeking new opportunities. For these reasons, it's imperative that the university maintain market competitive pay structures that signal when market changes occur and when it requires our attention. So the foundation of a market responsive comp structure and program is built upon three, what sounds like very simple things. First, clear job titles. Second, a clear understanding of who we compete with for talent. And third, a robust salary survey data from those competitors. In our OHR compensation department, we're driven to answer the question, how are we paying our employees relative to the markets in which we compete for talent? And how can we improve upon our pay stance in areas where we're low to market? We're often limited by funding constraints, but we believe our duty is to equip the university with market-responsive salary data in service to our incredible faculty and staff who are serving the state of Minnesota and beyond through education, research, and outreach. So let's look at how we do this for each of our employee groups. At the university, all of our civil service and P&A positions reside within 20 job families, ranging from finance, grants and contracts, museums, animal health, and more. To date, 18 of our 20 job families have gone through a transformation that we refer to as market refinements. The enhancements implemented by this project have made our compensation structures for civil service and P&A positions very highly market responsive. First, job titles were enhanced from broad and unclear titles such as Finance Professional 1, Finance Professional 2 or 3. Instead, now we have titles like Accounting, Insurance Risk Management, Accounts Receivable, Tax, all of which are paid differently in the market. Another example is moving away from generic healthcare titles such as Patient Care 1, 2, 3, or Allied Health Professional 1, 2. Instead, we have titles now like physical therapy, pediatric nursing, and social work. So appropriate salary benchmarking cannot be performed without that level of job title clarity. Second, we've identified the market for each job family. Put another way, we've agreed on what geographic area and what industries we hire people from and where they've gone when they unfortunately have decided to end their employment with the university. For most job families, we hire and lose our civil service and P&A employees to the Twin Cities Metro, all employers. There's some exceptions, such as very high-level research roles where we define the market as national employers or national higher education. But having clear job titles and an understanding of the market in which we compete for talent gives us the ingredients necessary to go after accurate salary data. Over the past 8 years, the university has built a salary database that is as sophisticated as you would find at any large for-profit organization in the Twin Cities. The database is built from salary surveys that have been procured from over 30 of the most well-regarded external consultants and survey groups. Employers across the country, including the U of M compensation team and our competitors here in the Twin Cities, we submit our salary data to these consulting groups each summer. And the data is reported back to employers in the fall. Then compensation teams across the country, including our own team here at the university, analyze the data from October through December of each year, allowing us to release fresh market data for all of our jobs each January 1, the same exact date that employers across the country with sophisticated compensation structures release their new data as well. Supporting the university administration, managers, faculty, employees with this type of information is our team's purpose and our passion. We believe we make the university stronger by providing actionable salary data upon which salary offers and pay increase decisions can be made. The next step involves actually getting results in the form of pay increases from these market refinements. This is challenging because at every single organization, the salary increase needs exceed what the organization has available for funding. And even when salary corrections are made, the market continues to move, creating an ever-changing landscape of what it takes to be competitive. The university is not unique in this regard. At the university, we do annual research into what other organizations are providing for their annual increase pools, and we then advise during the budget process to secure merit pools that are as competitive as possible. We've been more effective in these areas because we can better articulate our current pay stance as a result of those market refinements. We've also implemented a practice of setting aside funds for market adjustment at each campus, college, and unit. These funds are used to increase salaries for a handful of jobs each year that are most in need of adjustment. This is a best practice that has helped colleges and units bring salaries more in line with the market. We also assess compensation issues that we feel require a system-wide approach towards correction and implement a select number of those initiatives every single year. Last year, these items were selected based on the feedback from the Workforce Reinvestment Resolution and totaled $2 million in annual recurring investments. These same kinds of efforts have occurred in previous years as well, and we're currently working to identify the top 2 or 3 projects for fiscal year 26 based on feedback from the compensation work group that's part of the Workforce Reinvestment Governance Committee. In addition to these examples, we are also very passionate about working day-to-day with managers to bring visibility to compensation issues in their areas. For example, each January, our team provides each manager of civil service and P&A employees with custom reports that list the employees in their area and how their individual pay rates compare to the new market medians. Managers can see at the start of the year how the external landscape has shifted, and this allows them to begin to plan. We also provide manager education on our pay programs and strategies, and we offer our consultation to HR and finance leads at each campus, college, and unit in the creation of multi-year strategies for addressing compensation concerns. This is a quote from Ann Ehrenberg. She's the interim HR lead with the University of Minnesota Medical School, endorsing the comp programs and consultations she's received from our team. Megan Pingree, she's a business partner with the Awaka Masonic Cancer Center. She shared that quote, research market refinement has been helpful in the clinical trials office, as that department has a very strong external competition within industry. So they need to offer salaries that are as close to market as we can get. Now, in recent years, we've started to build the same market responsive comp structure for our faculty. We completed market refinements at the request of Duluth faculty in 2022. Then a year later, In 2023, Professor Mark B. produced a report titled Driven to Recover, an FCC report on the competitiveness of faculty compensation. Mark's report findings prompted a call from Rochester, asking if our team could perform more exact market refinements for their campus. We couldn't have been more excited to have been given this opportunity, and we completed that work in 2024. And our team just completed faculty market refinements for Crookston last week. That was as a result of the most recent bargaining and mediation with UEA. We have some very positive momentum building, and we hope to complete Morris faculty refinements in fiscal year 2026. We also want to begin working with colleges on the Twin Cities campus who expressed their interest as well. Our market refinements have allowed us to expand upon Professor B's report of overall faculty salaries, and we can now provide a very detailed account of how each professor is paid relative to market. We found several instances where there's no discrepancies to market, an equal number where faculty are paid above market, and others that are behind market and can now begin to be prioritized. The process of completing faculty market refinements is highly consultative and it's very collaborative. While working with Duluth, Rochester, and Crookston, they each had a highly engaged design team composed of faculty and administration. Conversations were very honest and direct, beginning with how we should define the market for talent. Faculty and administration voices and perspectives were valued and they're respected, leading to the market being jointly defined rather than being prescribed. The next step at each campus was for each faculty member to select a discipline such as archaeology, journalism, chemical engineering, or ballet that most closely aligns with their field of study. When stored in our system, along with a faculty member's rank, we are able to report if a faculty member is a full professor of economics, an assistant professor of digital art, or a full professor of early childhood education. Again, those two seemingly really simple elements, agreement on the market for faculty and clear job titles, allows our team to get to work, pulling median salary data from published surveys. We now know where we have faculty at Duluth, Rochester, and Crookston that are paid below, at, or above market medians for their rank and their discipline. And we're able to update this data each January 1 in the same manner followed for our civil service and P&A employees. The slide that you're looking at is a simple depiction of the before and after. On the left, you can see that our faculty are assigned to very broad titles of assistant, associate, or full professor. All three of these jobs have shared a single salary floor of roughly $51,000 with no market medians. We also have all of our various instructors in a single job title with a common salary floor of roughly $44,000. But the right of the slide represents the detail we provide after faculty market refinements are completed. In the case of Duluth, we have 480 faculty practicing in 155 unique disciplines, all of which have very different market rates for salaries. We provide the market median salary for each of these disciplines by rank, so we now know how the salary for each faculty members compares to market. We've had some successes with faculty market refinements in Duluth and Rochester, including the provision of fresh market data that's analyzed and updated each January 1st. But in addition, we've created an online report at the request of Duluth faculty that lists the market-based salary floor for each faculty discipline and rank. This report is also updated each January 1st. And then in terms of pay increases resulting from our work, any Duluth faculty member who was previously paid at a compa ratio below 0.75, meaning they're paid more than 25% lower than the market median, has received a pay increase to bring their salary to a compa ratio of 0.75. As of the fall of 2024, Duluth faculty have an overall compa ratio of 0.92, which means they're averaging about 8% behind the market median, and Rochester is at a 1.01. There'll be continual changes that affect how our faculty salaries compare to market, but we are positioned at Duluth, Rochester, and Crookston to be able to read those market changes each January 1 and then planfully respond. This slide features feedback from Rochester faculty regarding the faculty market refinement project and process. And then Dr. Jennifer David, interim associate dean at Duluth, also told us, quote, "I was happy to serve on the team and hopefully it would have positive outcomes for Duluth faculty. The Labovitz School of Business and Economics pays fairly close to the market. So in the end, we only had one faculty member benefit from a relatively small market adjustment. However, I'm sure that professor was very grateful for the adjustment." When we talk about providing market competitive pay to employees, that doesn't mean that our goal is to pay everyone at the market median. Each employee commands a different rate of pay based on their degree of job mastery. The university, along with other large employers across the country, assign each of their positions to a salary range. The midpoint of the range is equal to the market median or the 50th percentile salary for that position in the outside market. The range features a minimum and a maximum as well. And like other large employers, when we then encourage managers to move employees through that salary range based on their degree of mastery in their job. The bottom third of the range should be reserved for employees whose performance is below full mastery due to still learning job duties, gaining technical skills, or mastering behavioral competencies. And employees should meet this definition because they're new to their role, or they may have actually been in the job for several years, but they're still working on mastering the position. And then the area just below or at the midpoint of the salary range is reserved for employees who have mastered all the technical and behavioral skills associated with their position and are performing that role in a very fully competent manner. The employee understands what's needed and does all that's required of their position with little to no guidance. As mentioned earlier, employees can differ in how many years it takes them to achieve that level of performance. We often find that employees move to a higher level position around that time, starting over at a lower comp ratio, but in a new higher paid position with a higher salary range. And then finally, the area above midpoint is reserved for the individual who meets all of the criteria outlined for the full mastery employee, but in addition goes above and beyond the expected standards and consistently displays desired behaviors. And that person's known for sustaining just exceptional performance. Again, this type of range placement approach is used by large organizations across the country. And it's the main reason why a compa ratio should not be considered favorable or unfavorable until we know the job mastery of the employee or the group of employees. Finally, wages for our labor rep employees, including graduate assistants, are established via collective bargaining agreements and governed by each union contract. Most union positions are paid according to a pay scale that awards more pay for additional years of service. Performance is not considered when determining pay increases. And generally, the university would say the market for the majority of our union positions is the Twin Cities Metro, all employers, but each union may have their own interpretation regarding the relevant market. So as we move forward, we will remain focused on education and awareness, the right method for awarding increases, and advocating for advocate funding for comp adjustments. And specifically, we will complete market refinements for the 2 remaining job families and for faculty on the Morris and Twin Cities campuses. We expect to complete the education job family during the summer of 2025 and the administration job family the summer of 2026. We'll continue to update our salary ranges annually, and we'll continue to provide manager education and custom salary reports immediately after those updates occur. We will continue to stress the importance of establishing dedicated market adjustment funds as budget priorities at each campus, college, and unit, as these funds are our best vehicle for delivering pay increases to mission-critical roles that are most behind market. The university will look for operational efficiencies and opportunities to create savings that could be reallocated towards more competitive pay, and will work to position competitive pay as a strategic priority that requires our attention and funding in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the Regent? Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair Johnson. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering about, boy, the market refinements really show the complexity of these job classifications and being able to compare apples to apples, in the market. So really good work on those market refinements. And that one from UMD was really instructive of that. I'm wondering how many times we have people, or if you can give a sense of how many times we have people at a mastery level based in time of the job and performance reviews that are actually at a low compa ratio. So that's a disconnect, right? With people who are below the market, but you have looked like they're masters of what they're doing. Can you give us a sense whether that's a rare thing to have happen, or whether it's actually more common than we would like, or where things are at? I know it's a hard one without looking at it case by case, but wonder if you get a sense of things. Because what we don't want to have is, obviously, we don't want to have people who are performing and highly talented people who aren't getting rewarded for that talent.
The Chair Gully, Regent Wheeler, we don't store, so this learner mastery exceptional, we call it LME. We do not store that LME assessment in our PeopleSoft system. So we could otherwise run a report to identify that, but that rating also kind of changes. It's pretty flexible and fluid.
Yeah.
So we don't really have a way to run a report and know with any conclusive finding, like there's 15% of people who are fully masterful, but they're paid low, very low in the range. So we don't have a way to run a report on that. We just continue to provide education. We look at overall compa ratios. And so, yeah, we don't have data on that. It's not a storable item in our system.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, in these roles, in these staff roles, in civil service and P&A especially, people do move as they go through their career to new experiences. So people who are doing that, and it's not a small amount, again, we don't have a percentage, would go into a new job category with a new range and a new
Understood.
placement. And so sometimes you may have someone who never sees that mastery pay throughout their career because of their transitions into new experiences. Again, that's not everyone's experience, but it's not a small.
And that would be an explainable reason for
Yeah.
the variation.
Yeah.
I'm looking for, gosh, what about
People
the
who are there,
unexplainable
yeah,
ones,
have
and
deep
what do we know
expertise.
about those? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Miller. Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I find it fascinating that you actually had a system where you were calling people health or patient care 1, patient care 2. The fact that you're just moving into the 21st century and giving actual job titles, I'm like, kudos to you. Maybe not you only personally, but, and this was started between Mark Bees's his report and the faculty up at Duluth, which I believe are unionized, right? So I would just, for the record, I would make note that once again, a union and their requests kind of lead the way often as far as pay increases and pay fairness, et cetera, kind of thing. That's just a comment, but I'm so glad that we're actually having job titles now for everyone.
Said Cunningham.
If I may, Chair Wheeler and Chair Johnson here is, there's a couple of things, and, I appreciate your, how great it is that we're moving into the 21st century. And I can't help myself here but put a plug in for peak. I'm sorry. But like, this is the kind of thing that you get if you want consistency and you want regularization and you want management of things not to be done ad hoc in different ways in different places, then you institute peak. And it's the kind of thing that we'll see improvements of regularization and harmonization and best practices throughout the system in a wide variety of ways. So that's my little plug generally for peak, even if it doesn't apply to perhaps the particular example here. And then the other thing that I just have to toss out, and this might be my meeting theme of the 2 days, is we're very committed to our employees and very committed to workforce investment. And I want people to continue to remember that as we move into, the next month or two here. We're 100% not in normal times. There's nothing normal about this year's time or this year's budget. Hundreds of millions of dollars of our grants have been stopped. Our state budget will be flat. Despite that, Vice President Horstman and I are working very, very hard to maintain merit and to try to do the right thing by our employees. But when you see us doing the right thing by our employees this year, I want you to know that that's like extra extraordinary in the year that we're in, where across the country, there are hiring freezes. Across the country, there are merit freezes. Across the country, my peers are laying off hundreds of employees all over the country. So just like I have to just kind of do this, like we're having this lovely normal presentation.
Yeah.
This is not a normal time. There is nothing normal about the time that we are in. And yet we are still trying to really do the right thing for workforce reinvestment and for merit and for our employees and trying to get everyone the right way. But I just have to like, just break through the little bubble here of not normal, still trying to do the right thing. So with a lot of credit to the team. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Regent Hipsch.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. To that point, I mean, one of the things I see happening in the private sector a lot, and we know we're not the private sector, is companies are taking other companies' top people to try to get, the sales and the market share and everything else that goes with that. So are we doing, I mean, so that's a twofold question, but we have to keep our masters here, right? Masteries, whatever you call them, and we have to go get some masteries, but that means we have to have our pay scale really high in the high end, because if we're gonna get $1 billion of research coming in long-term, we're gonna have to have some really high achievers. I mean, are we ready for that? You know?
Maybe I can start out. And, if we went back to Senior Director Sullivan's presentation, there were some comments. I don't know if we got to them around turnover. And our turnover generally is below the national average of higher ed. When we presented in last February, as the Senior Director said, every category of employee was below the national average. And we can look at that data again. Where we do have high turnover is in the 1 to 3 year range. And it doesn't account for when we want to go after that game-changing researcher or faculty member, or people that are really a global face of a certain type of research or work. And so I think that is always a challenge, and that is something that we have to prioritize. We will never have all the funds we need for everything. But I do think also there are some questions around competitive pay in those early years that we probably need to look further into.
And if I may,
Cunningham.
Chair Johnson and Chair Gully, is that there's a couple ways we can address that. I mean, we do know there are microcosms of areas that have been systematically underinvested in. And Ken and I are doing some looking at that, and some of those are fairly glaring to me coming in, and we're doing work to do investment in those areas as an institution that we need to do work in. But then the other piece is really this kind of strategic, where do we want to excel and how are we going to get top talent? And frankly, there is, to my comment earlier of this is not normal times, we're going to see a lot of movement of great people around the country right now. There's a lot of people in DC that don't have jobs anymore in top science organizations. There's a lot of people across a number of institutions that are not aligned with the values of those institutions any longer around the country, and we'll be making an assortment of moves. So there is certainly ways to think about this. I think as we think about strategic planning and we think about where the areas we want to move towards, we're going to have to think about how we then also have strategic funds to do investment to bring in top talent to be able to manage those areas going forward. And but that also speaks to the need to be able to have strategic investment funds integrated into our budget to be able to do that.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Other questions or comments for Senior Director Kuehl? If not, I guess Vice President Bortman has some informational items and anything else he'd like to highlight.
Just one item, and it is, the requested update that we provided this meeting as an information item on our current contracts and where they sit. We are currently, since our last meeting, have open negotiations with both Teamsters and AFSCME. We have had one session with AFSCME. We have had two with Teamsters and another one scheduled here shortly. So they are meeting, and we hope to make progress there. The one group that is not on this list because we are still in the phase of the Bureau taking in the petition and both sides looking at the list of potential members is our medical residents, which have organized. And we are probably 99% of the way there to agreeing to that list. There are a small number, as I mentioned in a memo to the board yesterday, of approximately 37 fellows that we feel are in, we're trying to come to agreement on what job category they should be in. So it isn't that they should be in the union, they should be, but it's what we categorize them in and classify them as. And the BMS has instructed both sides to come to an agreement on that. I think we're fairly close. I would guess, could be any day now. So, and I'm getting head nods from the people who are in the know. So hopefully we will have a good update on that shortly. That's it.
Thank you, Vice President. Is there any additional business before the committee today? If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you.